During the Vietnam War, in the very center of Hanoi, there existed a special space bearing multiple layers of historical meaning: Hỏa Lò Prison. For American pilots shot down over the skies of North Vietnam, this place was sarcastically referred to as the Hanoi Hilton, a name that both expressed the wartime mentality of confrontation and reflected the fierce clash between two propaganda systems. However, behind that label lay a reality far more complex than what was later recounted in one-sided post-war narratives. This article focuses on the fates of the three most famous American pilot prisoners of war who were held for long periods at Hỏa Lò: John McCain, James Stockdale, and Robinson Risner. All were senior officers who had once played important roles in the United States Air Force or Navy, and who later became figures of major influence in American political and military life. For that reason, their stories do not merely reflect the personal experiences of prisoners of war, but also contributed to shaping what has been called the American POW culture in the collective memory of post-war America. What actually took place behind the stone walls of Hỏa Lò, how the lives of prisoners unfolded, and where the boundary lies between historical truth and propaganda myths constructed over decades are the central questions addressed here. Through a historical and humanitarian approach, the article seeks to decode Hỏa Lò not merely as a prison, but as a space of intersection between war, human will, and the process of reconciliation after conflict. Among the American pilot prisoners held at Hỏa Lò, John McCain stands as the most emblematic case, as he embodied all the defining factors of background, wartime circumstances, and later political influence. McCain was a U.S. naval aviator, born into a distinguished military family, in which the tradition of naval service had extended across multiple generations. Both his father and grandfather held the rank of admiral, making McCain not merely a combat officer, but a symbol of the elite officer class within the U.S. military. In 1967, as the Vietnam War entered an intensely escalatory phase, John McCain held the rank of lieutenant commander and flew the A-4 Skyhawk attack aircraft from the aircraft carrier USS Oriskany. On October 26, 1967, during a bombing mission over Hanoi, his aircraft was struck by an anti-aircraft missile. The hit caused the A-4 to lose control, forcing McCain to eject under extremely dangerous conditions. The low-altitude ejection resulted in severe injuries. McCain broke both arms and one leg and lost consciousness as he fell into Truk Bac Lake. Burdened by heavy equipment, he nearly drowned and survived only by activating his life vest in the final moments. Shortly thereafter, he was discovered by local residents and Hanoi militia forces. Despite the tense wartime atmosphere and widespread anger, timely intervention by soldiers helped protect his life, remove him from the crowd, and transfer him for medical treatment. Because of his serious injuries, John McCain was taken to a military hospital in Hanoi, where he was treated for many weeks. The rescue and medical care provided to a U.S. pilot shot down in the midst of war clearly reflected Vietnam's policy toward prisoners of war, and marked an important turning point that opened the long period of McCain's captivity at Hỏa Lò. After completing his initial medical treatment, John McCain was transferred to Hỏa Lò Prison in late 1967, where he remained imprisoned for 5.5 years until the Paris Peace Accords were signed. Due to his severe injuries and poor health during the early period, McCain was housed in the prison's medical area. Throughout his imprisonment, he received periodic examinations and treatment from military doctors from major Hanoi hospitals to monitor and stabilize the long-term effects of his wartime injuries. American pilot prisoners at Hỏa Lò, including McCain, were provided with food rations higher than the standard allotment for Vietnamese soldiers at the time. These rations were designed to ensure prisoners' health under harsh wartime conditions, while also serving long-term diplomatic objectives related to future negotiations and repatriation. Thanks to this level of care, McCain's physical condition gradually recovered from the initial shock. Beyond basic survival needs, the spiritual and psychological lives of prisoners were also given attention. McCain was able to participate in certain cultural and spiritual activities, such as reading newspapers and books, listening to current news, engaging in light sports, and taking part in religious observances on special occasions. These activities helped sustain morale and enabled prisoners to adapt to prolonged detention amid the realities of war. Like many other American pilot prisoners, John McCain underwent prolonged interrogations during his imprisonment at Hỏa Lò. In the early phase, he maintained a position of providing only minimal information as required by military regulations, such as his name, rank, and service number. Tensions escalated when McCain's father was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, making McCain a prisoner of particular political and propaganda value. In that context, the Vietnamese side reportedly proposed McCain's early release as a humanitarian and diplomatic gesture. However, McCain's response became a pivotal moment in the Hỏa Lò POW narrative. He firmly refused special repatriation, stating that he would only leave the camp if those captured before him were released in proper order. This decision clearly reflected military discipline, a sense of responsibility, and loyalty to fellow servicemen, even under prolonged captivity. This uncompromising and increasingly uncooperative stance led to periods of solitary confinement for McCain, with living conditions becoming harsher than before. Nevertheless, this phase also contributed to shaping his personal resilience and moral values, laying the foundation for his later role in the process of Vietnam-U.S. reconciliation after the war. After being repatriated under the Paris Peace Accords in 1973, John McCain returned to the United States and continued serving in the Navy until his retirement. His years of captivity at Hỏa Lò left a profound imprint on his thinking and character, directly influencing the political path he later chose. Entering politics, he became a U.S. Senator and one of the most influential voices on foreign policy issues, particularly regarding relations with Vietnam. From the position of a former prisoner of war, McCain played a key role in the normalization of Vietnam-U.S. relations in the 1990s. Together with other veterans, he advocated within Congress and the U.S. government to set aside past hostilities and promote cooperation based on shared interests and reconciliation. Notably, McCain returned to Vietnam multiple times, including visits to the Hỏa Lò Prison site where he had been held for many years. McCain acknowledged and recognized the humane treatment he and other American prisoners received from the Vietnamese side. From a combat pilot regarded as an enemy, he gradually became a symbol of post-war reconciliation, demonstrating the capacity to move beyond hatred toward a future of peace and cooperation between the two nations. If John McCain is viewed as a symbol of post-war reconciliation, then James Stockdale represents leadership and spiritual endurance within the American POW community at Hỏa Lò. Stockdale was a U.S. naval officer holding the rank of captain and was the highest-ranking American prisoner held there during the early years of the war. Captured in 1965, he spent 7 years and 6 months in prolonged captivity, becoming one of the longest-held prisoners at Hỏa Lò. His high rank and personal prestige quickly led other American prisoners to recognize Stockdale as an informal leader. Beyond seniority or age, he stood out for his disciplined mindset, solid philosophical grounding, and organizational ability. He was regarded as the spiritual center, guiding conduct and maintaining collective discipline within the entire POW community. In conditions of isolation, strict control, and intense psychological pressure, Stockdale's role extended far beyond the personal level. He became a moral anchor, helping American prisoners preserve their will, military identity, and sense of collective cohesion, transforming Hỏa Lò not merely into a site of detention, but into a space of silent struggle over spirit and organization. As the spiritual leader of the American POW community at Hỏa Lò, James Stockdale not only sustained his own resolve, but actively organized a form of collective resistance based on military discipline and comradeship. From the early years of captivity, he and several senior officers agreed to establish a shared code of conduct for all American prisoners. This code aimed to define boundaries between cooperation and non-cooperation during interrogations, while maintaining order, responsibility, and military honor under imprisonment. One of Stockdale's most significant contributions was the establishment of a secret communication system between cells. Through wall tapping, hand signals, and agreed-upon symbols, prisoners were able to exchange information, encourage one another, and maintain internal connections even while in solitary confinement. This system helped them avoid complete isolation, one of the most severe psychological pressures in the prison environment. Gradually led a self-organized POW network, in which senior officers took spiritual responsibility for their respective groups. This network strengthened collective resolve, turning the American POW community at Hỏa Lò into a disciplined organization existing alongside the camp's official management system. Alongside his organizational and leadership role, James Stockdale also became a figure of direct confrontation with camp authorities during periods of heightened tension. Fully aware of his position, he feared being used for propaganda purposes or exploited in ways detrimental to fellow prisoners. Consequently, Stockdale often chose extreme responses in attitude and demeanor to demonstrate non-cooperation and to draw clear boundaries in POW management. These actions led camp authorities to exercise particular caution toward Stockdale, as he was not only a resolute individual, but also the central connector of the self-organized POW network. His presence was seen as a factor capable of sustaining and even encouraging underground organizational activity within the camp, increasing tensions between him and prison administrators. Faced with the risk of broader influence, the Vietnamese side later decided to remove Stockdale from Hỏa Lò Prison, transferring him and several key officers to another detention facility with tighter controls. This marked the climax of the silent confrontation and underscored Stockdale's exceptional influence within the American POW community in Hanoi. After being repatriated and returning to the United States in 1973, James Stockdale quickly reintegrated into military life at a time when America was undergoing deep post-Vietnam War upheaval. Unlike many former POWs who were marginalized, he continued serving in the U.S. Navy, steadily advancing until reaching the rank of Vice Admiral, a testament to the U.S. military's recognition of his competence, resilience, and personal authority. Following retirement, Stockdale turned toward academia and education, becoming a military thinker and philosopher, particularly influenced by Stoicism. He lectured, wrote books, and spoke on leadership ethics and psychological endurance under extreme conditions. In 1992, he entered politics as a U.S. vice presidential candidate, marking a rare instance of a former prisoner of war reaching national-level politics. It was only decades later that documents and memoirs gradually declassified the story of the secret prison communication network, clarifying Stockdale's central role. From a figure once regarded with concern by prison authorities, he became a post-war symbol of willpower, organization, and leadership in adversity. Before his capture in the Vietnam War, Robinson Risner was already a legendary name in the U.S. Air Force. He was an ace pilot, a title reserved for those with outstanding aerial combat records, with notable achievements in the Korean War. These successful dogfights made Risner a symbol of skill, courage, and warrior spirit in the skies, respected by peers and highly regarded by superiors. During the Cold War, Risner's image was further shaped by American media as a national hero, representing air power and technological superiority. Newspapers, reports, and propaganda of the era often portrayed him as the ideal American soldier, brave, decisive, and unwaveringly loyal to his mission. This illustrious past created a stark contrast when Risner later became a prisoner of war in Vietnam. From a celebrated hero, he entered prolonged captivity, where fame no longer guaranteed privilege. His story thus reflects not only a personal journey, but also the reversal of fortune experienced by many American military icons during the Vietnam War. Robinson Risner was held at Hỏa Lò for 7 years and 4 months, becoming one of the longest-held American prisoners of the war. With his background as an ace pilot and military hero, Risner entered captivity with a strong personality, rigid resolve, and a confrontational stance. In the early period, he was uncooperative and firmly maintained the posture of a senior officer, leading to frequent tension with camp authorities. Over time, however, Risner gradually adapted to the reality of prolonged imprisonment. He learned to adjust his behavior, maintain personal discipline, and integrate relatively well into collective POW life. This change did not mean abandoning his principles, but rather reflected psychological survival in conditions of war and detention. Regarding living conditions, Risner was provided with food and medical care and at times received rations exceeding those of Vietnamese soldiers. This indicates that the POW policy at Hỏa Lò aimed not only at control, but also at maintaining physical health and psychological stability, even for strong-willed individuals with prominent pasts like Robinson Risner. Within the American POW community at Hỏa Lò, Robinson Risner was not only a former hero but also played an important organizational role, particularly during the early stages of captivity. One of his most significant contributions was the early dissemination of the wall-tapping code, a secret communication method that allowed prisoners to exchange information, encourage one another, and sustain a sense of community under isolation. With command experience from the Korean War, Risner was quickly recognized as an informal leader. He helped shape behavioral norms, encouraged internal discipline, and preserved military identity among prisoners even in the absence of freedom. This role was especially vital during prolonged captivity, when the risk of psychological collapse and collective disintegration was ever present. Through the secret communication network, Risner connected scattered prisoner groups, enabling them to share information, support one another psychologically, and reduce feelings of individual isolation. These activities were not overtly confrontational, but focused on preserving morale and internal cohesion. Thanks to these efforts, Risner was regarded by many prisoners as a spiritual pillar who helped sustain unity and collective awareness throughout captivity. His organizational role demonstrates that, in wartime imprisonment, leadership is expressed not only through command, but through the ability to connect people and uphold shared resolve in adversity. A distinctive aspect of Robinson Risner's POW experience was his participation in documentary and feature film projects produced by Vietnam in cooperation with the German Democratic Republic. This is a rare detail in POW history, as few prisoners appeared directly in film productions while hostilities were ongoing. Risner's participation reflected Vietnam's international propaganda strategy at the time, aimed at conveying images of detention conditions and treatment of American prisoners to foreign audiences, particularly socialist countries and Western anti-war movements. As a famous ace pilot, Risner's presence carried strong symbolic value, drawing attention and lending weight to these productions. From a personal perspective, this was also an unusual experience for Risner himself. From a combat pilot in the skies to an on-camera figure while in captivity. It illustrates how modern war unfolds not only on the battlefield, but also across images, public opinion, and international media. In POW history, Risner's case is thus unique and multi-layered. After being repatriated and returning to the United States, Robinson Risner continued serving in the U.S. Air Force and was promoted to Brigadier General, concluding his military career as a senior officer who had experienced both the heights of glory and the harshest trials. In recognition of his contributions and warrior spirit, a statue of Risner was erected at the U.S. Air Force Academy, making him an educational symbol for future officers of resilience and military responsibility. Notably, Risner lived long enough to witness the profound transformation of Vietnam-U.S. relations, from fierce confrontation to normalization and cooperation. This shift adds a special post-war layer of meaning to his life. A man who fought directly, endured years of captivity, and later saw former enemies establish diplomatic relations and pursue reconciliation. In the broader historical picture, Risner's post-war journey demonstrates that war is not an absolute endpoint. Individuals may carry painful memories, but history continues to move toward dialogue and peace. His case thus reflects both personal experience and the international reconciliation process after the Vietnam War. From the Vietnamese perspective, policy toward American prisoners during the Vietnam War was grounded in principles of humane treatment, consistent with international law and the realities of a nation engaged in intense warfare. Prisoners received medical treatment, adequate food, and opportunities for spiritual activities such as reading newspapers, listening to news, light sports, or religious observance when conditions permitted. These measures were humanitarian in nature and aimed at maintaining physical health and psychological stability. At a strategic level, Vietnam viewed prisoners not merely as detainees, but as important diplomatic assets. Preserving their health and lives was considered essential for international negotiations, especially in the context of the Paris Peace Accords and global public pressure. Ensuring that prisoners survived, could be repatriated, and later serve as post-war witnesses carried long-term political significance. Vietnam also acknowledged allegations of mistreatment from the U.S. side and some international organizations, particularly during periods of intense conflict and information shaped by two-sided propaganda. However, the core Vietnamese argument emphasizes that the attitudes and statements of former prisoners themselves after the war constitute important evidence. Figures such as John McCain, Robinson Risner, and other former POWs publicly acknowledged being rescued, kept alive, and treated according to certain standards, while not denying the harshness of wartime imprisonment. From this standpoint, Vietnam calls for viewing history within the context of total war, in which all nations faced material limitations and political pressures. This perspective does not seek to dismiss controversy, but to encourage evaluation based on post-war evidence and reconciliation processes, rather than solely on confrontational wartime narratives. War is fought not only with bombs and firepower, but also as a contest of wills within confined spaces, where individuals are removed from the battlefield yet continue to face severe trials of spirit, ethics, and personal resilience. In such circumstances, survival depends not only on physical strength, but on psychological control and the ability to preserve one's identity. Hỏa Lò, therefore, cannot be seen merely as a prison. It was a psychological, political, and humanitarian front where control, probing, and outward messaging coexisted. Prisoners became subjects of wartime management, international diplomacy, and ideological image struggles. The three representative figures, John McCain, James Stockdale, and Robinson Risner, embody three distinct yet interconnected layers of meaning. They represent military honor through discipline, loyalty, and responsibility toward comrades, survival will through adaptation, organization, and sustained morale under prolonged captivity, and ultimately the capacity to transcend hatred, as many of them chose dialogue over confrontation after the war. The deepest message of this entire narrative lies in post-war reconciliation. Reconciliation does not arise from erasing memory or diminishing the past, but from confronting history directly, acknowledging loss, conflict, and human limitations in wartime. Only when all sides face the truth can war truly end, not only on political maps, but in the consciousness and memory of future generations.